The fastest way to find out if someone truly deserves a place in your life has nothing to do with testing them, watching from a distance, or waiting for them to prove themselves over months and years of careful observation, and everything to do with one counterintuitive move that most people would never dare to try because it requires you to go first, to give before you receive, and to risk your own vulnerability before the other person has done a single thing to earn it. If you have ever been kept up at night because someone you trusted turned out to be someone you never really knew, if you have ever felt that sinking weight in your chest when a person you went out of your way for looked right through you as though your kindness meant nothing, then what you are about to hear will change the way you see every single relationship in your life from this moment forward. Because there is a method, rooted in behavioral psychology and confirmed by decades of research into human motivation, that allows you to see through the masks people wear and reveal the raw, unfiltered truth about who they really are at their core. And it all starts with a single act of unconditional generosity. Most of us, by the time we reach our 30s or 40s, have accumulated enough scars from friendships gone wrong, family members who disappointed us, coworkers who smiled to our face and whispered behind our back, that we develop what psychologists call relational guardedness, a protective instinct that tells us to hold back, to keep one foot out the door, to never fully invest in another person until they have given us concrete proof that they are safe. And on the surface this sounds perfectly reasonable, because why would anyone open themselves up to pain when experience has taught them that people are unreliable? But here is where the real masters of human connection, the people who somehow manage to build extraordinary networks of deeply loyal, genuinely loving relationships, diverge from the rest of us in a way that seems almost reckless until you understand the brilliant psychological logic behind it. These people do not hold back, they do not test the water with one cautious toe, they do not keep a mental scoreboard of who did what for whom. Instead, they walk into a new relationship and immediately offer the best of what they have. They pick up the check at dinner without being asked. They show up with a home-cooked meal when someone mentions they are having a rough week. They offer their Saturday morning to help a neighbor move furniture. They listen with full attention when someone needs to talk, even if it means rearranging their own plans. And to anyone watching from the outside, this looks like naivety. It looks like the behavior of someone who has not yet learned how cruel the world can be. But the truth is precisely the opposite, because what these people understand, and what the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer articulated centuries ago, is that the truest measure of a person's character is not revealed when they are suffering or desperate. It is revealed when they are receiving abundance. When someone is pouring goodness into their life with no strings attached, because hardship forces everyone into survival mode and survival mode masks personality. But generosity, freely given and freely received, strips away every pretense and exposes the architecture of a person's soul in a way that nothing else can. The Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying how the human brain processes gains and losses, and one of his most important findings is that people have an almost irresistible urge to rationalize the good things that come to them. So when someone receives an act of kindness, their brain does not simply file it away as a gift. Instead, the brain begins constructing a narrative to explain why the kindness was received. And this is where character becomes visible, because the narrative a person builds around your generosity tells you everything you need to know about whether they are someone worth keeping in your life or someone you need to release before they do real damage. There are three distinct patterns that emerge when you give freely to the people around you. Three categories of response that are so consistent across cultures, age groups, and socioeconomic backgrounds that once you learn to recognize them, you will never be caught off guard by another person's behavior again. And the first pattern is the one you will encounter most often because it represents the vast majority of people you will meet in your lifetime. Picture this scenario, because a version of it has probably already happened to you more times than you can count. You run into an old college buddy at a reunion, someone you genuinely liked back in the day, and you suggest grabbing dinner to catch up. You take him to a great steakhouse. You insist on paying the $200 tab because it feels good to be generous with someone from a chapter of your life that meant something to you, and your friend smiles broadly, shakes your hand, and says something like, "Man, this was incredible, next time dinner is on me, I mean it." And in that moment he probably does mean it, the warmth is real, the gratitude is real. But then life happens, days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and that promised dinner never materializes. Not because your friend is a bad person, not because he secretly despises you, but because the emotional weight of your generosity simply did not register deeply enough in his internal accounting system to create a lasting sense of obligation. And this is not a moral failing so much as it is a reflection of how lightly some people hold the thread of human connection. The French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau observed that most human beings are fundamentally preoccupied with their own comfort and safety, and that genuine concern for others, while not impossible, is far rarer than we would like to believe. And people who fall into this first category are living proof of that observation. They are not villains, they are not manipulators, they are simply people for whom relationships exist at the surface level. Pleasant enough when they are happening but not significant enough to generate a feeling of indebtedness that persists beyond the immediate moment. And the healthiest thing you can do when you identify someone as belonging to this group is to simply adjust your expectations. Do not waste emotional energy resenting them for being who they are. Do not replay the dinner in your mind and stew over the fact that they never followed through. Just mentally note that this is a casual acquaintance. Someone you can enjoy a conversation with at a party, but not someone you should count on when life gets hard. Someone who belongs in the outer ring of your social world where the stakes are low and the emotional investment matches. Because trying to force a deeper connection with a surface-level person is like trying to plant a tree in shallow soil. No matter how much water you pour, the roots have nowhere to go. Now, the second pattern of response is the one that should make your heart sing. Because when you encounter it, you have found something genuinely rare and precious. A person whose relationship with generosity runs so deep that receiving kindness creates in them not just a fleeting feeling of gratitude but a persistent, almost sacred sense of responsibility to return what was given. And these people are the ones who will change the trajectory of your life if you are wise enough to hold on to them. The anthropologist Marcel Mauss wrote extensively about what he called the gift economy, arguing that for most of human history societies were held together not by laws or markets but by the unspoken moral obligation that when someone gives you something, whether it is a physical object or an act of service or simply the gift of their time and attention, you are bound by a force deeper than social convention to find a way to give something back. And the people who fall into this second category are living embodiments of that ancient principle. Let me share a story that perfectly captures what this looks like in everyday American life. Because it happened to a woman named Linda who lives in a suburb outside of Dallas, Texas. Linda is 60 years old and she has always been the kind of neighbor who shows up. She is the one who organizes the block party, who brings soup when someone is sick, who watches your dog when you go on vacation without ever asking for anything in return. And every Thanksgiving she makes an enormous batch of her famous smoked brisket and cornbread and distributes it to families on her street. One November, a young woman named Jessica moved into the house next door, fresh out of a divorce, starting over in a new city with no family nearby, and Linda could see the loneliness written all over her face. So she packed up a generous portion of brisket, a container of homemade coleslaw, and a slice of pecan pie and brought it over with nothing more than a warm smile and a welcome to the neighborhood. Linda expected nothing in return. She had given food to dozens of neighbors over the years and most of them said thanks and that was the end of it, which was fine. But a few days later Jessica knocked on her door holding the same container Linda had brought the food in. And when Linda opened it, she found inside a beautifully decorated batch of homemade chocolate chip cookies and a handwritten note on simple stationery that read, "Linda, I was sitting alone in my kitchen eating your brisket and crying because it was the first time in months that someone made me feel like I mattered. I am not the best baker in the world, but I wanted you to know that your kindness meant more to me than I can put into words. Thank you for reminding me that good people still exist." Linda told me later that she stood in her doorway reading that note and felt something crack open in her chest. Not sadness, but a kind of overwhelming recognition that she had just met a person who understood the real currency of human connection. And she was right, because over the following years Linda and Jessica developed a bond that transcended the 30-year age gap between them. Jessica became the daughter Linda never had, and Linda became the mother Jessica had always wished for. And their relationship was built not on obligation or transaction, but on a shared understanding that when someone offers you grace, you honor it by offering grace in return. Not necessarily in equal measure, not necessarily in the same form, but with a sincerity that communicates, "I see what you did for me, and I will not let it disappear into the void." This is the hallmark of a person worth building your life around. Not the grand gesture, not the expensive gift in return, but the simple, unmistakable signal that your kindness landed somewhere real, that it was received by a heart that knows the weight of what it means to be cared for. And if you have someone like this in your life right now, whether it is a friend, a sibling, a coworker, a neighbor, do whatever it takes to nurture that relationship, because these are the people who will answer the phone at 2 a.m. when your world is falling apart. These are the people who will drive 3 hours in a rainstorm to sit with you in a hospital waiting room. These are the people who make the whole bruising, exhausting, sometimes heartbreaking business of being a human being worth the trouble. But now we arrive at the third pattern, and this is the one that will either save you years of suffering or, if you fail to recognize it, slowly consume your emotional health, your financial stability, and your sense of self until you barely recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror. Because the third type of person is the one who receives your generosity and, instead of feeling grateful, begins to feel entitled, and the progression from gratitude to entitlement is so gradual, so subtle, and so psychologically insidious that most people do not realize it is happening until they are already in deep. Neuroscience gives us a precise explanation for why this occurs. When a person receives an act of kindness, their brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter associated with pleasure, reward, and motivation, and that initial dopamine hit feels wonderful. It feels like warmth and connection and appreciation, but the human brain is an adaptation machine. It is designed to normalize any stimulus that is repeated consistently, which means that the second act of kindness produces slightly less dopamine than the first, and the third produces less than the second, and by the 10th or 20th repetition the brain has fully recalibrated its baseline expectation so that what was once a generous gift is now simply the normal state of affairs. And when the normal state of affairs is disrupted, when the generosity slows down or stops, the brain does not return to its original neutral state. Instead, it interprets the absence of generosity as a loss, as something being taken away, and loss triggers a neurological response that is far more intense than the pleasure of the original gain. Which is why people in this third category do not simply fail to appreciate your kindness, they actively resent you when you stop providing it, as though you have committed an act of cruelty by no longer giving them something they were never owed in the first place. Let me tell you about a man named Steve, a 55-year-old mid-level manager at a manufacturing company in Ohio, because his story is one of the most devastating examples of this pattern that I have ever encountered. Steve had a younger brother named Mike, and Mike had always been the family dreamer, jumping from one business venture to the next, always convinced that the next idea was the one that was going to make him a millionaire. And when one of those ventures collapsed spectacularly, leaving Mike with $200,000 in debt and the very real prospect of losing his house, Steve did what older brothers do. He went to his wife, explained the situation, took out a home equity line of credit against his own property, and handed Mike a check for $200,000. And Mike wept, literally wept, and swore on their mother's grave that he would pay back every cent. Over the next 3 years, Steve continued to show up for Mike in ways that went far beyond the loan. He paid for Mike's kids' sports equipment. He hosted every holiday dinner at his own expense. He drove Mike to job interviews when Mike's car broke down. And through all of it, Mike expressed gratitude, said thank you, told Steve he was the greatest brother in the world. And Steve believed him because Steve wanted to believe that his sacrifice meant something. Then the economy shifted. Steve's company downsized. His salary was cut by 30%. And suddenly the family holiday dinners that used to feel like a joy became a financial burden he could no longer carry. So he called Mike before Christmas and said, as gently as he could, "Hey, listen, Things are really tight for us this year. I don't think I can do the usual gift cards for the kids. I hope you understand. And he never mentioned the $200,000, not once, because he did not want to make Mike feel bad. But Mike's response was a sentence that Steve told me he will remember until the day he dies. Mike said, "Seriously, Steve? The kids have been looking forward to this for weeks. You can't put together a couple $100 for your own nieces and nephews? That's pretty cold, man." And then he hung up. Steve sat in his kitchen staring at the phone in his hand and felt something inside him finally break. Not his heart exactly, but the elaborate fiction he had constructed over the years that his brother was a good man going through a hard time. Because in that moment the truth was undeniable. Mike did not see Steve's generosity as generosity. He saw it as a service, an entitlement, something that was owed to him by virtue of being the younger brother, the one who had struggled, the one who had suffered, and when that service was interrupted even momentarily, Mike's response was not understanding or empathy but outrage, as though Steve were the one who had done something wrong. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche had a term for this kind of moral inversion. He called it slave morality, a worldview in which the person who receives is not grateful but resentful, in which generosity is not seen as a gift but as a debt that can never be fully paid, and in which any attempt to set boundaries is met with accusations of selfishness, cruelty, or betrayal, and people who operate from this framework are among the most dangerous individuals you will ever encounter. Not because they will physically harm you, but because they will hollow you out emotionally. They will drain your energy, your money, your optimism, your faith in humanity. They will make you question your own goodness. They will twist your perception of reality until you genuinely believe that you are the problem. And this is a form of psychological manipulation that therapists call gaslighting, the deliberate distortion of someone's reality to maintain control. And it is remarkably effective because it preys on the very quality that made you generous in the first place, your desire to be a good person, your fear that maybe you really are being selfish, your deeply human need to be loved and accepted by the people you care about. If you recognize this pattern in any relationship in your life, whether it is a sibling, a friend, a romantic partner, or even a parent, the guidance from every major school of psychological thought is unanimous and unambiguous. You must establish a firm boundary immediately. You must turn off the faucet of generosity and observe what happens, because a person who truly cares about you will respond to boundaries with understanding, perhaps with disappointment but ultimately with respect, while a person who has been exploiting you will respond with rage, with guilt trips, with emotional blackmail, with tearful accusations designed to pull you back into the cycle of giving. And that response, that eruption of entitlement when the supply is cut off, is all the confirmation you will ever need that you are dealing with someone who does not love you but loves what you provide. And those are two fundamentally different things. The critical insight that ties all of this together is that you cannot discover which of these three categories a person belongs to by being cautious, by holding back, by waiting and watching from a safe distance, because caution only shows you a person's public face, the carefully curated version of themselves that they present to the world when the stakes are low, and the public face tells you almost nothing about what lies underneath. The only way to see underneath is to give, to offer something real and meaningful without conditions or expectations, not as an act of self-sacrifice but as a deliberate, strategic investment in information, because the return you get is not the dinner they buy you or the thank you card they send. The return is knowledge, it is clarity. It is the ability to see with absolute certainty whether the person standing in front of you is a passing acquaintance who will drift out of your life as easily as they drifted in. A genuine soul who will walk beside you through decades of joy and hardship, or a parasite who will feed on your goodness until there is nothing left. This does not mean you should be reckless with your generosity. It does not mean you should hand out money to everyone you meet or exhaust yourself trying to earn the affection of people who have already shown you who they are. It means that when you encounter a new person who might become important in your life, or when you want to understand the true nature of someone who is already in it, you should give once, give genuinely, give without keeping score, and then step back and watch. Because the response will tell you everything, and I mean everything, And once you have that information, you can make clear-eyed decisions about where to invest your finite emotional energy. You can stop wasting years on people who will never value what you bring to the table and start pouring that energy into the relationships that will actually sustain you when life gets hard. And life will get hard, it always does. And when it does, the only thing standing between you and the abyss is the quality of the people you chose to surround yourself with. So here is what I want to leave you with. Do not be afraid of being generous. Do not let past betrayals turn you into someone who withholds kindness out of fear, because withholding kindness does not protect you. It just ensures that you will never find the people who are worthy of it. The ones who will receive your gift with open hands and a full heart and spend the rest of their lives finding ways to give it back. And those people are out there. They are rarer than you might hope, but more real than you might fear. And the only way to find them is to be brave enough to go first. To extend your hand before you know whether it will be held or slapped away, and to trust that the temporary sting of discovering someone's unworthiness is a small price to pay for the lifelong warmth of discovering someone's goodness. Because at the end of the day, every meaningful relationship you will ever have began with someone who was willing to take that risk, and it might as well be you.